I woke before dawn the morning I decided to give away my children. That's not quite right. I'd been awake for hours, lying in the dark beside them, listening to their breathing and trying to convince myself there was another way. There wasn't. The habit of waking early stayed with me even after Daniel died. When he was alive, there were chores that couldn't wait animals to feed, fires to start, life to maintain. Now I woke because lying in bed meant thinking, and thinking led nowhere good. Better to rise in the dark and count what remained than to lie there counting what was lost. I made breakfast that morning the way I'd made it for weeks, watering the porridge until it was more water. Then oats, stretching our supplies through mathematics that never quite worked. Tommy asked if there was more. He was 8, old enough to know better than to ask. But hunger makes children forget their manners. We're saving it for supper. I told him. The lie came easily now. Sarah didn't ask anymore. She was only 6, but she'd learned. She just watched me with those old eyes children get when they've stopped expecting much. When they've learned that wanting and having are different things, and the distance between them can't be crossed by wishing. I stood at the counter after they finished, measuring the flour that remained. 3 days' worth, maybe 4 if I watered everything more. I did the math standing there with my hand in the near-empty bin, rearranging the numbers in my head like I could make them mean something different. They meant the same thing every time. The cabin felt too big and too small at once. Too big because Daniel wasn't in it. His chair sat empty by the fire. His side of the bed stayed cold. His absence filled every corner. Too small because I couldn't escape the evidence of what I'd become. His tools, sold one by one. The second plate I'd finally put away last month, unable to bear washing it for no one. The careful rationing that wasn't enough. I'd heard about Cole Garrett from Mrs. Henderson 2 weeks earlier. She'd mentioned him as gossip while I scrubbed her laundry, my hands cracked and bleeding in the cold water. A man alone on a failing ranch, she'd said, kept to himself. Probably wouldn't last another winter. She'd meant it as judgment. I'd heard it as possibility. A man alone might need workers. My children could work. Tommy was strong for 8. Good with animals. Sarah had careful hands. Could help with chickens come spring. They could earn their keep. They could survive. That was the bargain I made with myself. In the dark hours, they could survive. Even if it meant I couldn't keep them, pride was a luxury. My children's hunger was a fact. That evening, I packed our few belongings into a worn bag. Not everything I couldn't bear to pack everything. Just enough for a journey. The children watched me with questions in their eyes. We're going on a trip. I told them. Where? Sarah asked. I couldn't tell her the truth. Couldn't say to a stranger's ranch, where I'll beg him to take you because I can't feed you anymore. Couldn't say to the place where our family ends and your survival begins, to see someone who might help us. I said instead, are we coming back? Sarah's voice was small. I didn't have an answer that wasn't a lie. So I kissed her forehead and told her to get some sleep. We had a long walk ahead of us. That night I lay awake, listening to my children breathe, memorizing the sound. A mother is supposed to keep her children fed. That's the bargain. The one job that matters more than all the others. I was failing. The walk would be 3 miles. I'd make it in the morning, before I could lose my nerve. Before I could remember that giving away your children, even to save them, marks you forever as the mother who couldn't. The walk to the Garrett Ranch took most of the morning. Sarah's shoes were nearly worn through, but she didn't complain. Tommy carried our bag without being asked. His small shoulders set with a determination that broke my heart. They were too young to be this brave. I'd rehearsed my speech during the sleepless hours. Professional. Businesslike. No begging. Tommy was strong. Sarah was good with animals. I could cook and clean. We'd earn our keep. Not asking for charity, not asking for anything except the chance to work. The Garrett Ranch appeared through morning mist, like something from a dream. Though not a good one. Sagging fence, patched roof, windows dark. It looked as desperate as I felt. For a moment, standing at the edge of his property, I almost turned back. A man this poor couldn't take on 3 more mouths. I was bringing him my hunger, expecting him to feed it. But Tommy's hand found mine, and I felt how thin his fingers had become. Sarah swayed slightly, catching herself. We'd skipped breakfast to save the last of the oats. I couldn't turn back. The door opened before I could knock. Cole Garrett stood there tall, weathered, maybe 40. Eyes that had seen their own winters. I cataloged him quickly the way you do when your children's lives might depend on your judgment. Not dangerous, not soft, somewhere in between. I launched into my speech before he could speak, before I could lose my nerve. Mr. Garrett, I'm looking for work. My children and I. Tommy's strong. He's good with animals. Sarah has careful hands. I can cook and organize and manage a household. We'd earn our keep. We're not asking for charity, just the chance to work. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something shift in his expression. Then he looked past me to the children, and his face changed entirely. Men's faces do that sometimes when they see something suffering that shouldn't be. "When did you last eat?" he asked. The question derailed everything I'd prepared. "Yesterday." I lied. He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes. He went inside without another word, and I stood there wondering if he was getting a gun to run us off his property. Instead, he came back with bread and dried apples. "Give this to your children," he said. I wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain some scrap of dignity. But Sarah made a small sound, and I took the food. Watched my children devour it with a desperation I'd been pretending not to see. Tommy ate like he was afraid someone would take it away. Sarah cried while she chewed. I turned away so they wouldn't see my face. "I'll take all 3 of you," Cole said behind me. "But not as workers, as family." The word hit me like a fist. Family. We'd been a family. Now we were just 3 people trying not to starve. And this stranger was offering us a word I thought we'd lost forever. "I can't." I started. "You can," he interrupted gently. "And you will. Because those children need more than pride. And you know it." Sarah's hand found mine, trembling. I looked down at her upturned face, at the hope I'd been trying not to let her feel. Tommy stood straighter, trying to be the man he wasn't old enough to be yet. I opened my mouth to refuse again, to say we'd work. We'd earn it. We wouldn't be anyone's burden. But the words wouldn't come. All that came was a sound I hadn't let myself make in months, something between a sob and a prayer. "All right," I whispered. "All right." I told myself I was being practical when I started negotiating terms. That I was protecting us all by making this arrangement clear, businesslike, temporary. The truth was, I couldn't bear the weight of his kindness, without turning it into something I could understand, something I could repay. "I'll manage the household," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Cook, clean, organize. Tommy will help with morning chores. Sarah can tend chickens when spring comes. You provide food and shelter through winter. Come spring, we'll reassess." Cole listened without interrupting when I finished. He nodded slowly. "If that's how you need to think about it, that's fine. But understand, I'm not offering you employment. I'm offering you a home. I need to earn our keep," I insisted. "Then earn it by staying." He said simply, "By not making me eat alone anymore. By letting those children bring some life back to this place." I didn't know how to argue with that, so I stopped trying. The cabin was smaller than I'd expected. 1 bedroom, a loft. He showed us around with few words, pointing out where things were kept, how the stove worked, where the well was. Then he gestured to the bedroom. "This is yours," he said. "We can't take your bed," I protested. "You can and will. I've slept in the loft before. It suits me fine." Oh, I wanted to argue he shouldn't give up his bed, shouldn't rearrange his life, shouldn't be this decent. But I was too tired, too broken, too grateful. While he showed Tommy the barn, I took inventory. It's what I did when everything else fell apart. I counted things, made lists, imposed order on chaos. His supplies were adequate for 1 person through winter. Maybe. For 4 people, we'd need miracles or careful rationing. I could do careful. Careful was all I'd done for months. I found flour, beans, dried meat, root vegetables in the cellar. Coffee, real coffee, not the substitutes I'd been using. Salt, lard, a few precious eggs. I mentally calculated how to make it all stretch, how to portion and preserve and waste nothing. This is what I could give him. I thought, the mathematics of survival. The careful planning that turns scarcity into enough. That first evening was awkward. We sat at his small table, too small for 4, but we made it work. Cole barely talked. The children were uncertain, eating slowly, waiting for permission or rejection or something that made sense. I was rigid with determination to prove we weren't a burden. "Food's good," Cole said finally. It was beans and cornbread, stretched thin, nothing special. But the way he said it made me think he'd been eating poorly for a long time. And I felt a small spark of something that might have been purpose. After supper, I washed dishes while Cole showed the children how to play checkers. Their laughter felt foreign in this quiet place. I watched them from the corner of my eye. These strangers becoming something else too fast for comfort. That night, lying in a borrowed bed in a strange man's house with my children pressed close, I set rules in my head. Keep distance. Earn our keep. Don't rely on kindness, because kindness runs out. I'd learned that when Daniel died and the town's casseroles stopped coming. When sympathy turned to avoidance. When I became the uncomfortable reminder that loss comes for everyone eventually. This was temporary. I told myself, come spring, we'd leave. I just needed to survive winter without owing him anything I couldn't repay. I was already lying to myself. I already owed him everything. The first weeks unfolded in careful rhythm. I rose before dawn, old habit. Impossible to break, and made breakfast stretch through strategic cooking. 1 egg became 4 portions. Cornmeal and water and hope became something resembling pancakes. Cole never commented on the small portions. He ate what I gave him and seemed grateful for it. He worked outside most days. Tommy shadowed him to the barn, and I watched from the window, ready to intervene if needed. But Cole was patient in a way that surprised me. Showed Tommy how to mend fence. Didn't raise his voice when Tommy dropped the hammer twice. Just picked it up and handed it back. Taught him to check the animals, to notice small signs of trouble before they became big ones. I contributed in ways I'd almost forgotten I knew how. Organized his chaotic storage, finding things he thought he'd lost: nails, rope, tools buried under years of bachelor disorder. Made his supplies last through combinations he hadn't considered. Beans soaked overnight cooked faster. Saved fuel. Stale bread became breadcrumbs. Became breading for protein that stretched further. Root vegetables stored properly lasted months instead of weeks. He noticed, but didn't comment. Just nodded sometimes when he saw what I'd done, like it was what he'd expected. Like I was meeting some standard I hadn't known existed. Sarah transformed in ways that hurt to watch. My daughter, who'd been silent since Daniel died, started humming while she helped me. Started asking questions again. Started acting like a child instead of a small, frightened adult. One morning, Cole said something about the chickens, I don't even remember what, and Sarah laughed. I stopped mid-task just to listen. It had been so long since I'd heard that sound. Days passed. Then weeks. We orbited each other like planets, close but never colliding. Held in place by some invisible force that was part necessity, part something else I wasn't ready to name. I learned his rhythms, the way he moved in the morning. Stiff until the cold worked out of his joints. The way he checked on the children without making it obvious. The way he said goodnight brief, gruff, but consistent. One morning, I caught myself setting out 2 coffee cups before I realized what I was doing. I stood there holding the second cup, staring at it like it had betrayed me. When had that started? When had he stopped being the stranger and become Cole? When had 2 cups become automatic? I told myself I was just being efficient, practical. But the truth was I'd started listening for his footsteps, started knowing his patterns, started noticing when he was troubled and when he was tired, started seeing things I hadn't meant to see. Like how he set aside the best portions for the children without comment. How he fixed Sarah's shoes one evening, saying nothing, just taking them and bringing them back, repaired. How he taught Tommy card games by firelight, losing more often than chance would suggest, letting Tommy feel capable. Each kindness was a nail in the coffin of my carefully maintained distance. There's a difference between surviving together and building together. I kept trying to maintain the first while we were already doing the second. I noticed everything the way his shoulders relaxed when he came inside. Like the cabin had become a place he wanted to be instead of just a place he slept. The way Tommy started standing like him, unconsciously mimicking his posture. The way our supplies, stretched between 4 instead of 1, somehow lasted longer than when I'd hoarded them alone. 6 weeks in, Tommy asked if we could stay through Christmas. I'd been peeling potatoes, and my hands stopped moving. Christmas was 2 months away. I'd been thinking in terms of weeks, carefully not planning beyond the next storm. Christmas meant permanence I wasn't ready to acknowledge. We'll see, I said. The same answer mothers give when they don't have better ones. But that night, lying in the dark, I admitted something to myself. I'd stopped counting days until spring and started counting other things. Instead, how many times Sarah smiled? How many times Tommy forgot to be scared? How many times I caught myself feeling something dangerously close to safe The blizzard hit the second week of December. We woke to white walls and wind howling like something dying. Cole was already up, securing what could be secured, checking on the animals. I watched him through the window, snowblind and determined, and felt fear rise in my throat. Daniel had gone out in weather like this. Daniel hadn't come back. But Cole did. Came back covered in snow, shaking like a leaf, but alive. "Storm's bad," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "We're snowed in for a few days at least." 3 days, as it turned out. 3 days trapped inside with nowhere to hide from proximity. The cabin felt smaller, warmer. 2 4 bodies, fire burning constant, steam from cooking fogging the windows. Children played checkers with Cole by firelight. His laugh was rusty but real. I watched from the kitchen, pretending to work, actually just observing this strange domesticity we'd fallen into. The second night, Tommy asked about the photograph on the mantel. I'd noticed it weeks ago, but hadn't asked a woman and a boy. Faded, formal, old. Cole went still. For a moment. I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my wife and son, Mary and Jacob. Fever took them. 5 years now. The room felt different after that. Heavier. Tommy said he was sorry in that solemn way children do, when they don't fully understand loss, but recognize its shape. "Me too," Cole said quietly. Later, after the children had fallen asleep, we sat in rare shared quiet. The fire burned low. Snow continued its assault outside. I'd been meaning to go to bed for an hour, but couldn't make myself move. Something about the storm, the forced closeness. The way grief had been named aloud, it made words possible that hadn't been before. Daniel died in a logging accident, I heard myself say, 14 months ago. Some days it feels like yesterday. Other days, I can barely remember his face, and that terrifies me more than anything. Cole looked at me, really looked, and I saw a recognition there, the specific understanding of someone who'd walked the same dark path. "Forgetting isn't betrayal," he said. "It's how we survive." Something in me cracked at that permission. I'd been carrying guilt for every moment I didn't think about Daniel. Every hour I managed not to hurt. Every small pleasure I accidentally felt. As if grief was a debt I had to pay constantly or risk losing him twice. "Does it get easier?" I asked. "No," he said honestly, "but you get stronger. Or maybe just more used to carrying it. I can't tell the difference anymore." We sat in silence after that. Not uncomfortable silence, the other kind. The kind that happens when 2 people understand each other without needing more words. I'd been widowed 14 months and still dreamed of Daniel most nights. But that night, snowed in. I didn't. I dreamed of coffee and quiet and someone's steady presence. I woke feeling guilty, disloyal, like I'd betrayed Daniel by sleeping peacefully in another man's house, by not suffering enough, by daring to feel anything approaching contentment. The snow melted on the 3rd day. I told myself we'd go back to careful distance, maintained boundaries, but something had shifted in that forced closeness. I'd let him see my wounds. He'd shown me his... That kind of seeing can't be unseen. When did his grief become as real to me as my own? When did I start wanting to ease it? When did protecting my heart stop feeling like wisdom and start feeling like cowardice? I didn't have answers. Just kept moving through days that felt less like survival and more like something else. Something that might have been the beginning of living again, if I'd been brave enough to call it that. Late February brought thaw and disaster in equal measure. The creek flooded, swollen with snowmelt, threatening Cole's small herd. Everything he had was in those cattle. Spring income. Summer survival. Possibly the difference between keeping the ranch or losing it. I saw panic flash across his face before he locked it down. "I need to move them to high ground," he said, already pulling on boots. "I'm coming with you," I said. "It's not. I grew up on a ranch," I interrupted. "I know cattle. You'll need help." He looked at me. Really looked, then nodded. The work was brutal. Freezing mud. Panicked animals. Water rising faster than seemed possible. But something in me woke up that I'd thought had died with Daniel. Muscle memory from years of farm life. I knew which animals to prioritize, how to move a stubborn cow, where the safest high ground was. Made quick decisions without second guessing. Cole followed my judgment without question. That surprised me more than anything, this man who'd been alone for years, trusting my calls in crisis without hesitation. We worked as a unit. No discussion needed. Tommy and Sarah helped from the cabin, keeping hot food and dry clothes ready. Watching the younger calves we'd penned safely. We saved the herd. Barely. Lost 2 older cows who couldn't make the climb, but the rest were safe. By the time we finished, we were both exhausted and mud-covered, soaked through, barely able to stand. "You knew what to do," Cole said, looking at me with something like wonder. "I was a rancher's wife before I was a widow," I replied. The words surprised me, not their truth, but that I'd said them. I'd been so focused on what I'd lost. I'd forgotten what I still had. Skills. Knowledge. Competence. Worth beyond just being hungry and grateful. We stumbled back to the cabin. The children had hot water ready, clean clothes, food waiting. We'd taught them that. I realized how to work as a team, how to support each other, how to function as something that looked remarkably like a family. 2 days later, Mrs. Henderson stopped by, ostensibly to check on flood damage, really to judge. "Staying here all winter, I hear," she said, her disapproval thick enough to cut. "With your children?" "People talk. You know, people always talk," I said evenly. "A widow, living with an unmarried man. Children involved. You should think about propriety, about reputation." After she left, I started mentally packing again. I wouldn't shame Cole with gossip. Wouldn't let my children hear whispers about their mother. We'd managed before. We could manage again. Somehow, but Cole stopped me before I could say anything. He was quietly furious in a way I hadn't seen before. "They don't get to decide what's decent," he said. "We're surviving. That's decent enough. You and your children brought life back to this ranch. You work harder than any hired hand I could afford. You turned this place from somewhere I was just waiting to die into somewhere I want to wake up. Let them talk." His words shouldn't have mattered so much, but they did. Because he wasn't defending his reputation, he was defending mine, defending us. That night, I lay awake thinking about choices, about how survival had become something more without me noticing the transition, about how temporary had started feeling permanent, about how much that terrified me. In that moment, mud-covered and exhausted, I'd realized something I'd been avoiding for weeks. I'd stopped thinking about spring as leaving time. When had that happened? When had this stranger's ranch started feeling like home? The answer scared me more than hunger ever had. March arrived with longer days and mounting panic. Spring was coming. That had always been my deadline reassess in spring. The rational thing was to leave before I needed him more than I already did, before my children's attachment deepened further, before I forgot that security is temporary and loss is permanent. I had enough saved from careful supply management that we could move on, find somewhere else, start over again. It made sense to go while going was still possible, before whatever this was became something I couldn't walk away from. One evening, while Cole was checking fence lines, I started packing. Not everything I couldn't bear to pack everything, just enough to test what it felt like, to see if I could do it. To prove to myself I still had the option of leaving. Sarah found me with the half-packed bag. "Mama, why are we packing?" Her voice was small, frightened. Did we do something wrong? I looked at my daughter, her face fuller now than when we'd arrived. Her eyes clearer, her fear of being sent away written across every feature. She'd been afraid of abandonment since Daniel died. And here I was, proving her fears right. We couldn't stay anywhere, couldn't trust anyone, couldn't build anything permanent, because permanent things break and broken things destroy you. "No, baby," I managed. "You didn't do anything wrong." And then why? I didn't have an answer that wasn't a lie. Cole returned an hour later. Saw the bags immediately. His face closed off, but his voice stayed steady, careful, like he was gentling a spooked horse. "You're free to go," he said. "Always have been. But I need to ask, are you leaving? Because you want to? Or because you're afraid to stay?" I couldn't answer. Couldn't find words for the terror of needing someone, of my children loving someone who could disappear like Daniel did. Couldn't explain that safety felt more dangerous than hunger, because hunger was at least predictable. You knew where you stood with hunger. Safety lied. Safety made you soft and vulnerable and completely unprepared for the inevitable moment when everything fell. Apart again. I'm afraid too, he admitted, sitting down across from me, afraid of caring about 3 more people I could lose. Afraid this winter was just a temporary arrangement and you'll take the pieces of life you brought back when you go. Afraid of wanting something I can't keep. Then you understand why I need to leave, I said. "I understand why you think you do," he corrected. "But being afraid isn't a reason to run. It's a reason to be brave enough to build something real. What if I can't?" My voice broke. "What if I'm not strong enough? You walked 3 miles with starving children to ask a stranger for help. You worked a flood in freezing mud. You kept 4 people alive on supplies meant for 1. You're the strongest person I know." I wanted to believe him. Wanted to stop running from fear disguised as wisdom. But Daniel had died on an ordinary Tuesday. That's what terrified me most, how ordinary it was. How quick loss comes. How little warning you get before your entire world changes. Why would I risk that again? I'd built such careful walls. I whispered. When did they become a prison instead of protection? Maybe when you realized what you were protecting yourself from wasn't worse than what you were protecting yourself from feeling, he said. We sat in silence. The fire burned low. The children slept. The bags sat half-packed. A choice waiting. "I can't promise I won't die," Cole said finally. "Can't promise nothing bad will happen. But I can promise that running from fear isn't the same as running toward safety. And I can promise that if you stay, you won't be alone, whatever comes. I didn't unpack that night, but I didn't leave either. Just sat in the dark cabin, listening to Cole move around in the loft above us, and tried to remember when fear became the same as wisdom. Tried to distinguish between protecting myself and punishing myself. Tried to figure out if courage meant staying or leaving. I woke before Donald habit. Cole was already outside. The bags sat where I'd left them, half-packed, a choice, waiting. I made coffee instead of deciding, watch the sun rise through the window. Thought about all the sunrises I'd seen from this cabin, and all the ones I might see if I was brave enough. Some answers take time to arrive. Some choices can't be forced. But making coffee for 2 people instead of 1, that felt like a start. The first truly warm day arrived in late March. Windows open, smell of thaw and possibility. Mud instead of snow. Cole was preparing to ride to town for supplies. The way he did every few weeks. Same routine, same question. "What do we need?" he asked, checking his list. I could have asked him to post a letter inquiring about work elsewhere. Could have started the process of leaving. Could have protected myself one more time against the dangerous possibility of staying. Instead, I heard myself say, "Ask about lumber prices? We need to expand the cabin." He stopped, turned, studied my face like he was trying to read a language he didn't quite speak. The question held everything: hope, fear, disbelief, wanting. I set down the dish I'd been washing, dried my hands, met his eyes. "If we're staying, if you want us to stay, we can't live like temporary guests forever. Sarah needs her own space. Tommy's outgrowing the loft." And I forced the words through years of trained self-sufficiency, through months of careful distance, through every defense mechanism I'd built since Daniel died. "I want to stay. If you'll have us. Not as charity, not as hired help, as partners." Cole didn't sweep me into his arms. This wasn't that kind of moment, that kind of story. He just nodded slowly, thinking it through the way he thought through everything careful, thorough, honest. "Then we need to make this legal," he said, finally. "Not because of Mrs. Henderson's gossip, but because you deserve security. The children deserve to know this is their home, to inherit something if anything happens to me. I'm asking you to marry me." "I'm not ready," I started. "I know," he interrupted gently. "I'm not asking you to love me. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I'm asking you to be my partner, to build this ranch together, to raise those children together, to have legal protection and security instead of just living on trust and hope. The rest, if it comes, can come in its own time." I'd expected romance. Expected pressure or expectation or some demand I couldn't meet. Instead, he was offering exactly what I needed: partnership without pretense, security without obligation, time without pressure. "I need time," I said, "to trust this is real, to grieve fully, to rebuild myself before becoming someone's wife, in more than name. Take all the time you need," he said. "I've waited 5 years. I can wait longer." "You might be waiting forever," I warned. "Then I'll wait forever." He said simply, "You're worth waiting for. All 3 of you are." Something in my chest cracked open. Not breaking opening. like winter ice finally giving way to spring. We negotiated like the partners he'd called us. Marriage for legal protection, living as equals. Separate rooms until and unless I decided otherwise. No expectations beyond mutual respect and shared effort. Everything clear, everything honest, everything on my terms, I realized, standing there making plans, that I wasn't the desperate woman who'd walked here in winter. I'd been so broken then, so small, so focused on just surviving the next day that I couldn't imagine anything beyond that. Somewhere between then and now, I'd become someone bigger, someone capable of making choices instead of just accepting circumstances. He was offering partnership, not rescue, asking me to choose, not stay out of desperation. That distinction mattered more than I could articulate. I'd been so afraid of needing someone that I'd forgotten wanting someone is different. Need is desperation. Want is choice. I wanted to stay. Wanted to build something with this quiet man who'd given me dignity when I had nothing else. Wanted my children to grow up here, safe and fed and loved. Wanted to wake up in this cabin, drink coffee from 2 cups, watch seasons change and know this was home. Wanting felt revolutionary. All right, I said. Yes. We'll marry, we'll build, we'll stay. He smiled, then rare, genuine, transformative. I'll ask about lumber, he said, and I'll tell the preacher we'll need him come May. If that suits you. That suits me. I agreed. He rode to town that morning. I unpacked the bags while he was gone. Not dramatically, just methodically putting our things back where they belonged. Where they'd been belonging for months. Sarah watched me, uncertain. Are we staying? Mama, she asked. I met her eyes, saw hope there, fragile but real. Saw the question she'd been carrying since Daniel died, would anywhere ever be home again? We're staying. I told her, we're home. She smiled, my daughter, who'd forgotten how to smile, who'd learned not to hope, who'd been so careful with her heart. She smiled like sunshine breaking through clouds. That's when I knew I'd made the right choice. Not because it was safe, nothing's safe. Not because it was certain, nothing's certain. But because choosing to build something despite uncertainty, choosing to love despite loss, choosing to hope despite fear, that was the bravest thing I'd ever done. The widow who walked here couldn't have made this choice. She was too broken, too afraid, too small. But I'd somehow become bigger in these months. Big enough to choose risk over safety. Big enough to choose life over mere survival. Cole came back that evening with news of lumber prices and a wedding date. We sat at the table making plans where to expand, how to build, what Sarah's room would look like, how to make Tommy's loft proper instead of makeshift. We were building not just a cabin, a life, a family, a future. And for the first time since Daniel died, I let myself believe in futures again. We married in late May, when the prairie was green and the sky was impossible blue. Simple ceremony in town, practical vows, few witnesses. I wore a dress Sarah and I had sewn together, nothing fancy but new. That felt important. Starting something new instead of just patching old things. Cole's vows were brief. Mine were briefer. We promised partnership, honesty, respect. I didn't promise to love, honor, and obey those words stuck in my throat. Remnants of a marriage that ended in loss. Instead, I promised to stay, to build, to try. That felt more honest. The expansion took all summer. Cole and I worked side by side while the children helped in smaller ways. Tommy learned carpentry. Sarah learned patience, watching walls rise board by board. Together, we turned survival quarters into a real home. Sarah's room had an east-facing window so she could watch sunrises. Tommy's loft got proper stairs and enough space to stand up straight. The kitchen expanded enough that I could work without bumping into stored tools. We added a proper pantry, a root cellar with better ventilation, a covered porch for sitting on summer evenings. Each board we placed, each nail we drove, felt like an act of faith. We were building for permanence, for futures, for the audacious belief that we'd still be here in 5 years, 10 years, 20. Somewhere between business partnership and summer's end, I fell in love with Cole. I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe the evening he spent 3 hours teaching Tommy to whittle, patient through every mistake. Maybe the morning he brought Sarah wildflowers without occasion or explanation. Maybe the dozens of small moments when his kindness became less surprising and more essential. Or maybe it was the night I reached for his hand, without thinking, just reached across the space between us, the way married people do, and he held it like it was precious, like I was precious. "I love you," I said, surprising myself. He looked at me, really looked. "Seeing everything?" "I know," he said. "I've been waiting for you to know, too." "How long have you, since you saved my herd in that flood?" He admitted. "Watching you work, seeing you come alive again, realizing you weren't just surviving anymore, but fighting for something. That's when I knew." "Why didn't you say anything?" "You needed time," he said simply. "Still do. Maybe I can wait." "You don't have to wait anymore," I told him. That night, I moved my things from the bedroom to his. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. Because separate rooms had served their purpose, and now I needed something else. Needed closeness instead of distance. Needed to stop protecting myself from possibilities. Mrs. Henderson came by again in August. This time she wanted advice on preserving abundant garden harvest. The scandal of our arrangement had faded once we married. More than that, our success spoke louder than gossip ever could. "You've made something good here," she admitted grudgingly. "Unconventional, but good." After she left, Cole and I laughed about it, about how unconventional love built stronger foundations than conventional loneliness, about how we'd accidentally created a family out of desperation and determination. Tommy asked me that evening why I'd decided to stay. We were sitting on the porch, watching Sarah chase fireflies in the growing dark. Because running from fear isn't the same as running toward safety. I told him, and because sometimes the bravest thing is letting yourself need someone. "Were you scared?" he asked. "Terrified," I admitted. "Still am sometimes. But being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're risking something that matters." Winter came again in November. My second winter in this cabin. But it felt like the first real one. Last year, I'd been surviving, hoarding, counting days. This year, I was living. We'd built expanded storage, had a healthy herd, children warm and well-fed. I stood in my kitchen, not borrowed anymore, but genuinely mine, and remembered the woman who'd walked here a year ago, barely able to stand from hunger, ready to surrender her children because keeping them alive was more important than keeping them close. That woman felt like someone else entirely. someone small and broken and afraid. I'd somehow become bigger, stronger. Not because I didn't hurt anymore. I still thought about Daniel, still missed him, still carried grief. But I'd learned to carry other things too: joy, hope, love, the full weight of living instead of just surviving. The lesson took me months to learn. But Cole taught it through action. More than words, asking for help isn't shameful. Refusing it when you're desperate is pride that serves no one. What began as survival became love built on mutual respect and shared hardship. Accepting help doesn't make you weak. It makes you wise. Sometimes, the person who has little to give offers the most important thing: dignity in your moment of need. Cole had given me that, had seen my hunger and my shame and my desperate pride, and offered me a choice instead of a solution. Offered partnership instead of rescue. Offered family instead of employment. I'd spent so long protecting my heart. I'd forgotten hearts were meant to be used. Meant to break and heal and break again. Meant to risk and hope and dare to love, despite knowing loss comes for everyone eventually. Second winter evening, 5 plates on the table instead of 1. Tommy teaching Sarah the checker strategy Cole taught him. Cole's hand finding mine across the table. Familiar now. Necessary. Not a fairy tale ending a real one. Built on choice and mutual respect, and the courage to be vulnerable enough to build something lasting. I'd walked here with nothing. Now I had everything. The difference wasn't what I'd been given. It was what I'd chosen to accept. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and steady and beautiful. Inside, my family sat warm and safe and together. I looked around the cabin at the expanded rooms we'd built, at the children who'd learned to laugh again, at the man who'd offered us dignity when we had nothing else. "What are you thinking?" Cole asked, catching me watching. That I'm glad I stayed. I said, simply, that I'm glad I chose this. Chose you. Chose us. He smiled and squeezed my hand. Sarah looked up from her checkers game and grinned. Tommy asked what was for dessert. Ordinary moments in an extraordinary life we'd built from hunger and hope. This was home. Not because it was easy or certain or safe, but because I'd chosen it. Because we'd built it together. Because love grows stronger when you plant it in honest soil, water it with hard work, and give it time to take root. The woman I'd been couldn't have understood that, but the woman I'd become did. And that made all the difference.